A little bit of a traveler here that we're going to hear from. Pastor Joe and Lila, they are in Montana right now, and they're on a sabbatical this month. And so they're going to, Joe's going to give us a little introduction from a field. So let's go ahead and roll that clip. Is it just me, or did he have an accent? Maybe it's the context of being out in a field, but anyway, he'll come back, and maybe he'll keep it, maybe he won't. But anyway, we'll be able to see them here in a couple weeks back with us. And we're so looking forward to this new theme going into the next year and just what God has for us about spiritual hospitality. This is right in line with what you guys are doing. Down at the University of Oregon, welcoming people into our homes, setting the table, maybe setting an extra chair or two for our neighbors, for our friends, extending the hospitality that God has given to us. There's a huge opportunity for that. And I believe that's really what God is calling us to do, whether it's our theme or not. This is the kind of lifestyle that God wants for us. So I appreciate that Todd mentioned the eclipse, and we're going to kind of go back to that idea. I think it's an amazing opportunity that we had to go stand out, whether you're standing out in the front yard or the backyard, or we tried to get far away from we have a street light right out in front of our house, and so we tried to get a little far away, but just that it was such a small, short event relatively, just 2 minutes of totality or whatever we were able to experience here, but the awe that there was from that event. And Keenan's going to go through a few slides here. These are some pictures that a friend of mine, who's a missionary in Taiwan, and they're back in the States now. They were in the path out in a Walmart parking lot. And these are some of the photos that he took. Just to remind us of the amazement that it was to experience that. And it's an opportunity that we don't get very often in our lives, to just, for everyone, whether they know God or not, to step outside and to take in the brilliance and the spectacular sight that we were able to see. And God is amazing, isn't he? And just to experience some of that awe is pretty incredible. So I just want to start and kind of get us thinking a little bit today. So put your thinking caps on. I will read this relatively slowly because it takes a little bit to process. But this is a friend of a friend's post on Facebook about the eclipse, and my friend posted that he was just amazed that there were 4 engagements of people that he knew on the eclipse day. Kind of a romantic time, right? And so this was one of the responses to that. See if you can follow it. Love is blind, therefore blindness causes love. Eclipses cause blindness. Love causes relationships. Relationships cause Facebook posts. Facebook posts cause insecurity. Insecurity causes hoarding. And hoarding causes reality TV shows. Reality TV shows are popularity contests. Popularity contests involve people trying to stand in front of each other to steal their glory. The moon stands in front of the sun during an eclipse. Therefore, eclipses cause themselves. I was a philosophy major. It doesn't make any sense, but it's an interesting line of thinking. But, you can go back and you can search Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, and you can see just the millions upon millions of posts that came from this one single event that lasted for literally just a few minutes. The amazement that God has put into this universe, we only catch a glimpse of. And I think part of God's plan is to put us in awe. Just the way that he set up everything. I was talking to my father-in-law a couple weeks ago, and he was sharing about how the telescope, I forget the new name of it, we have the Hubble telescope, which is, the super powerful telescope, but there's a new one that NASA has designed that's actually 100 times stronger than the Hubble. And so in our ever-expanding universe, they're hoping to see even farther away than we can now. And just the corners of our universe that have never been explored before. No one has ever seen. But our God created that. And so we have this opportunity to be in awe of our universe, but I really do think that God is giving us opportunity to be in awe just in the day-to-day. We may have what we think of as a mundane schedule, and we're just going to go have lunch now, or we're just going to go on a walk, or we're just going to go to the store. But God has appointments for us. God has amazing opportunities for us and amazing people to meet. And as we start to extend hospitality to others, I really do believe that God is opening up these opportunities for us to be amazed at those, even in those small instances. So we're gonna go into a little bit of the chapter 9 of the book of Mark today. And so if you have a Bible, click or turn your page to chapter 9 of Mark. And we're going to be in it's a story that I wasn't super familiar with. It's kind of couched right underneath the story of Transfiguration, where Jesus and a few of the disciples go up on the mountain, and they're just amazed by these revelations of God. And then there's a healing. It's entitled "The Healing of a Boy with an Evil Spirit." And so we're going to get into that, Mark chapter 9, starting in verse 14. And we're just going to start with those first two verses. It says, "When they came to the other disciples, they saw a large crowd around them, and the teachers of the law arguing with them. As soon as the people saw Jesus, they were overwhelmed with wonder and ran to greet him." So there's a spectacular sight. If you read back in that chapter, you read about the Transfiguration. Just this amazing thing that the disciples didn't even know what to do with it or how to understand it. It was so amazing. And then to get to this place where the crowds were gathering around, overwhelmed with wonder of who Jesus was and who Jesus is. So they ran to greet him. That's how our story starts. And we have this opportunity that Karen mentioned a little bit earlier of these, literally the nations flocking to our country, our nation, here in the United States. And to an extent, they are in awe or wonder about this country that many of them have never set foot in before. And whether for good reasons or maybe it's just Hollywood, that paints this picture of who we are as a nation, but the nations are coming. And kind of our first point for today is that shock is a reaction to the unexpected. So these students are coming, and there is an expectation of what life is going to be like here in the U.S. And if you've ever traveled anywhere else in the world, even Montana, you can experience some culture shock, right? And you can experience there's some difference of how people live their lives. And we come into it with certain expectations. I remember a few years ago, I met an international student who was just deathly afraid of going to someone's door, even in town. He just wouldn't go up and knock on the door because he had seen too many movies of you go up to the door and then Granny meets you with a shotgun, and says, "Get off my property," and you can imagine that scenario. But that was the impression of American neighbors that he came with. And so I'm just going to share a couple of stories of some culture shock that I was able to experience just in our travels overseas. But I'm going to start with just one that we were able to kind of be on the receiving end of this week. So we're hosting a couple of Chinese scholars for a 2-week trip. And they have a group of, I think it's like 22, 23 professors who are here. And they're mostly on campus taking classes and kind of seeing the sights this week. But it was about 9:45 a couple days ago. And one of the scholars came out with her phone. And she has a little GPS map on there that shows a dot that was just about a block down the street from our house. If you know where we live on 7th Street in Independence. It's a really long street. We always tell people we're 4 stop signs off of the main road. And you go down and it dead ends. They were farther down the street from where we live. And so, okay, I'll go out on the street and wave at them. So we, kind of had these. There were 5 of the professors who were in our front yard. And kind of you're piecing the story together. Communication was a little hard, but I think what happened is they went out of the grocery store, which is Ware-Mart, and they, instead of turning left back to their host family, they turned right and kept walking and walking and walking. Well, put the distance together, they were 3.5 miles from their host family, and so I took pity on them. Had them hop in the van and drove them the 3.5 miles back home with all their bags of groceries and everything. But this is hopefully it turned into a good experience for them to see a little bit of American hospitality. But that could have turned into a really bad situation at almost 10 o'clock at night, wandering the neighborhoods in the dark, and they might have had Granny meet them at the door at that point. So, but we have these experiences when we travel, we go to a new place. I assured them that this is normal, that Holly and I, when we were in Taiwan, we didn't know which direction was north for about 3 months, just because the streets are not in a grid. And so you're winding around, and your whole internal organism, however that works, is off. And so that's normal, that's okay, and they got home safely. So when we first moved to Taiwan, we ended up living there for 4 years, and we learned a lot. But when we were first packing for that first flight, we were fairly naive, and to say the least. And so we packed as much as we possibly could. You get out the scale, and you weigh everything to 50 pounds, and you put all the heavy stuff in your carry-on, right, because they don't weigh that. And so we had, everything we possibly could. And we actually ended up arriving in Taiwan, and one of our bags, which was mostly books, was just completely shredded. It had 2 extra plastic bags that the airline put over it to kind of try to keep everything together, but this brand new piece of luggage was completely gone because we didn't pack very well. But when we arrived, we started unpacking our stuff, and we had put in some rolls of toilet paper, some shampoo, thinking that this is a third world country. We at least need to have some toilet paper for that first week, And then we figure out that they actually hand out tissue at the gas station when you fill up with your car, because all of the pumps are the same price. And so to differentiate the service, the gas stations actually give you stuff. So they give you water bottles and tissue and free car washes and stuff like that, because the price of gas is exactly the same. So we didn't know that, so we had packed all this stuff that we didn't need. We can go down to the store a block away from our house and buy all the shampoo that we wanted and the same stuff that we bought here, but we had packed all this stuff with us, not knowing what to expect. And so, needless to say, we were kind of in shock in a sense of just what life was going to be like when we arrived. And you slowly start to ease into that, but it takes some time. Another time we were traveling around mainland China, and we had visited some friends, and this one friend said, "Hey, I'll get you on the bus. This is the best way to go to your next destination." And he said, "This is the express bus." And so we asked him what that means, and he said, "Well, the express bus is better because it goes directly to your destination. You don't make any stops. You know, it's a little bit better bus." And so we said, "Sure, we'll pay a little bit more, take the express bus. It's going to be like a 6-hour drive or something. We might as well do it well." And so we get on the bus, and the first thing we notice is all these signs that say no smoking, and the fact that the bus driver is currently smoking. And then, it has air conditioning, but most of the windows are down, for probably to let the smoke out, I'm not sure. But we start going, and then we're on this like nicely paved toll road, going along. And then we take this exit and get onto this gravel road, drive for a little bit, get to this really rinky-dink kind of rest area. And I won't go into all the details, but one of the worst restrooms that I've been in my life. And it was a board that you stood on over a pit. So you can imagine the rest. But this was the express bus, the one that wasn't supposed to stop. And so we stopped, and for like a half an hour, and people were shopping and using the board, and and we made sure to follow somebody who was on our bus, so we would get back on the right one and leave at the right time. We didn't want to get left on this gravel road at this weird place. So, the whole trip, rather than being like this nice, relaxing express bus with air conditioning, it was this, you're gagging on the cigarette smoke, and you're, trying not to touch your shoes because of where you just walked, and, all these things. This was not the relaxing experience we had hoped for. So those are, those can be kind of funny experiences when you look back, and there can also be some shock that you kind of hold on to because it really made you feel more than uncomfortable. I was on a flight to India, and I don't think this is, I won't say this is like a statement for all of the airlines, but my particular experience was, it gave me a little bit of a glimpse into what discrimination looks like. I was one of, I think there was one other white-skinned person on my flight, and they came around for food service and for drinks, and they gave me some food, but when they came around for drinks, I was sitting on the aisle, and there were two other people sitting towards the window, and the stewardess literally looked over me, took the order from the two other guys, and passed me by. So I thought, well, maybe she was just busy and forgot about this conspicuous-looking person sitting closer to her than the other guys. And so I just, reminded them and said, "Hey, could I get a drink too?" And so she looked at me kind of stern-faced and said, I'll be right back." So I waited and waited, and we landed the plane, and she never did return. So sometimes we get to experience those times where you are singled out, where you're made to feel different. And those can be shocking experiences as well. And I know that's a mild example compared to what some people go through on a day-to-day basis with discrimination. But those things do happen. And hopefully we're not on the giving end of that, with students who are coming here to our country. And hopefully we're extending a good face and hospitality towards them. But sometimes this shock, this, you can say culture shock or any other kind of shock, is, it's used by the military even. We have this term called shock and awe. And we do that pretty well, I think, for the U.S., where you go in and you just shock someone so much that they don't even know how to retaliate, how to respond. And that's what enemies do in a military situation. You just try to keep the other person or the enemy off balance and to put them at a place of unease so they don't know what to expect next. If you're going to do this so, powerfully and so quickly that we don't even know how to respond the next time, and maybe we won't. And so that's the strategy that militaries use around the world. But today I want to talk a little bit about how we respond to the shock that we have in our lives. And maybe you haven't had a chance to travel overseas, but if you go even visit a new family for the first time and walk into their house, you see that, oh, things are arranged a little differently. The food is a little different from what I'm used to. You know, there are these small instances of shock that we go through. And so as we go into that, to understand how we respond to shock, I think we really need to understand how that shock happens. And so we have a little slide. We're going to go through this really quick. And I know this is a little more of a teaching lesson than we usually do on Sundays. But this is a helpful way to think about how we respond to shock initially. And so this is probably one of the most simple examples of the stages of culture shock that I've seen. And I use this with students a lot. You have this honeymoon phase. And so when you first go to another culture, you think everything is just amazing. And the food is awesome, and the people are friendly, until you meet more than one of them, and then you start to figure out, oh, actually, people are kind of similar around the world. But for the first, number of weeks, maybe even the first number of months, you're in this honeymoon phase where things are pretty good, and you kind of gloss over, like you do if you've been on a honeymoon. That's the vacation time. You're getting to know your new spouse. Everything's good, and then you get home and you have to figure out, which way the toilet paper goes on, and how to load the dishwasher, and who's going to water the plants, and all of these kind of day-to-day things, and it gets a little harder after that. So you kind of go down into that anxiety mode. And I know for us, like the first year of our marriage was probably the most difficult year that we've had, because you're having to figure out all of those things and the different families of origin that you come from. And so you get into that high anxiety mode. And then you start to figure out, okay, we can work through these things, we can compromise. This is good. This probably isn't so good, but I can accept it. And this is just different. We do this back in my home country, but here they do it a different way, and that's okay. And you get to that point of adjustment. And then you kind of can get up to ultimately acceptance, that this is fine. And you start to actually become, there's a term for it called a third culture person, because you don't completely identify with your home native culture anymore. You don't completely identify with your host culture anymore. You're somewhere in between. And that can be a really hard thing when you come back, because the reverse culture shock can even be worse than the initial culture shock. Because then you come back to a culture that maybe has relatively stayed the same, but you're coming back with a new perspective and a new way of seeing things. And so that's a little bit about the stages of culture shock, just to kind of get a view on the ups and downs and how this can feel. And I think we've all probably felt that in our lives to one extent or another as we go through shocking moments. So how do we respond to culture shock? So if essentially culture shock or shock in general is unmet expectations, you think of the person who just got in a car accident. They were expecting to go home smoothly and to not have that happen to them. But all of a sudden they have this collision and they go into shock because that's not what they were expecting to happen. And so as you go into shock, people have some different reactions, and we've probably all heard of the fight and flight reaction. Some people, they have that car accident, and if they're capable physically to do it, they're going to be out, cutting off their seatbelt and going out and rescuing the other person and doing these things. Some people have that flight mode where they just want to get out of there, remove themselves from the situation, don't want to deal with all of this collateral damage and things that are happening. There's a third category called freeze, and sometimes this happens when you are in a shocking situation where you don't know what to do, you don't fight, you don't try to fix it, and you don't leave, you just sit there and don't respond. I've seen that with my kids sometimes where, in my not so better moments. If, you yell at them or something about a situation and they just don't do anything, which makes me more angry because I want them to fight back and tell me off, or I want them to, go to their room and cry. I don't want them just to sit there and act like they don't understand what I'm saying. But that's a natural response to a shocking situation that we get into. Maybe we don't even know what to do. And this morning I suggested there's actually a fourth option. So we can fight, we can flee, we can freeze, or we can go into the situation with faith. And that's where we're going to end up today, is just looking at what does that look like to respond to a shocking situation with faith as opposed to those other options. And so let's go ahead and continue on in our story in Mark chapter 9. We're going to go to verse 16. And this is Jesus talking. He says, "What are you arguing with them about?" Talking to the religious leaders. Verse 17. "A man in the crowd answered, 'Teacher, I brought you my son, who is possessed by a spirit that has robbed him of speech. Whenever it seizes him, it throws him to the ground. He foams at the mouth, gnashes his teeth, and becomes rigid. I asked your disciples to drive out the spirit, but they could not.'" Now think about it for a moment. This guy he's had some trauma, this father, throughout his life. Not to speak of what the trauma of this kid that he's going through. But that he's possessed by a spirit, it throws him to the ground, he foams at the mouth, gnashes his teeth, and becomes rigid. And that's a pretty big deal that this family has been dealing with for, we assume, the whole life of this child. So Jesus responds to verse 19. "O unbelieving generation," Jesus replied, "how long shall I stay with you? How long shall I put up with you? Bring the boy to me." So we can kind of imagine that Jesus is kind of not happy with this crowd, with these people who are not doing anything about it. This boy is obviously dealing with a horrible situation, this evil spirit, and they haven't been able to respond appropriately. So they brought the child, verse 20. When the spirit saw Jesus, it immediately threw the boy into a convulsion. He fell to the ground and rolled around, foaming at the mouth. Jesus asked the boy's father, "How long has he been like this?" "From childhood," he answered. It has often thrown him into fire or water to kill him at the same time. And that's okay. It's okay to have questions. It's okay to doubt. It's okay to not quite understand what's going on. And if you take the place of this father, he's been dealing with this for the life of his child. This, horrible, horrible experiences of the spirit seizing him and convulsing and foaming at the mouth. And this is terrible stuff. And for him to say, "I do believe, but help me overcome my unbelief." There's still some doubt here. We haven't seen you come through yet, Jesus. Help me fill that gap. Help me to increase my faith. And that's an opportunity that we have today to have increased faith in what God has for us. And so as we wrap up today, just wanted to suggest to you that faith is something that can keep us stable. Faith keeps us stable even when we're in the middle of storms, even when we're in the middle of shocking situations. If we can respond to those situations with faith, God keeps us level and even-headed. And so we're going to just wrap up with a short little video clip from YouTube. And this is the first time I watched this, I was thinking he was cursing, but listen closely to what this guy is saying as you'll see what he does. So I think it took him like 22 minutes or something like that to get across the Grand Canyon. That was the Grand Canyon. And so when you're doing your prayer walk tonight, think about him. And if you can walk 22 minutes across the Grand Canyon, the football field shouldn't be that difficult. But when we're in a tough situation, I mean, I can't think of a probably more anxiety-ridden situation than trying to walk across a tightrope like that. And when we're in those kind of situations, life is maybe spiraling out of control. We don't know exactly what to do. We don't know when the wind's going to pick up and make us go this way or that. We have a choice to acknowledge that God is there and that God has this situation. And you may be going through some situations in your life where there's just maybe a season of confusion. I have something going on in our family that is, that's the only way I can really describe it, is confusing. And we don't really know how to respond or what to do except to pray and to come to God and say, God, you have this. I don't. I can't. I don't even know what to do or even that first step to respond. But God, you have this. So God, would you help me to increase my faith? And so if you'd go ahead and worship team, if you'd come, we're gonna close with that and have a moment of prayer. Maybe you have a time in right now that you're going through where your head is kind of spinning. Maybe your heart is aching for something or for someone, and you don't even know how to respond. So let's go ahead and pray and just ask God to help us increase our faith, to take away our unbelief. God, we do come to you just as that father did in the story, that he asked you to take away his unbelief, that he believes, but he needs more faith. And so God, we want to believe, and we want to believe more and to trust you more and to have increased faith. So God, as you're leading us today and into this week, God, would you build our faith in you? As we sing these songs, would you increase our understanding of who you are? And God, that we could hold on to that and hold on to you as we go into our lives outside of this building. God, we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.